The morning of the shareholder meeting, Lynette Ossie showed up in a dress she bought at a consignment shop on Fifth Avenue for $38. She had pressed it the night before, standing in the tiny bathroom of her sister's apartment, using a travel iron that spat steam unevenly. The dress was a deep navy, a line, nothing remarkable. Her shoes were clean but scuffed at the heel where the leather had started to separate. She wore no jewelry except for a slim watch with a cracked crystal face that she had not replaced in 2 years. The security guard at the lobby of Hartwell Capital Group glanced at her, looked down at his clipboard, and then looked at her again. "Ma'am, this floor is restricted to shareholders and C-suite personnel only." "I know," Lynette said. "I'm both." He didn't believe her. She could see it in the way his expression didn't change, polite and immovable. The way people look at someone they've already decided doesn't belong. She placed her identification on the desk without being asked. He picked it up slowly, read it, and then read it again. "I'll need to verify with." "You can verify with whoever you like," Lynette said. "I'll be in the boardroom." She walked past him. He didn't stop her. What none of the 37 people in that room knew, as they filed into their seats with their tailored suits, and their leather portfolios, and their practiced smiles, was that the woman who arrived last, alone, carrying a tote bag from a free conference she had attended 4 years ago, owned more of the company than any of them. They were about to find out. Her name before marriage had been Lynette Ossie Boateng, and the Boateng was the part people underestimated, always. Her grandmother had come from Ghana to Baltimore in 1971 with $200 and a degree in accounting that American firms spent 15 years refusing to honor. She had kept her own books, started a small import business, and left Lynette's mother a house and a philosophy: never show what you have until the moment it matters most. Lynette had grown up on that philosophy the way other children grew up on fairy tales. She was 26 when she met Preston Hartwell at a financial conference in Chicago. He was the kind of man who filled a room without trying, tall, easy in his own skin, with the confident looseness of someone who had never been told no in a way that stuck. He was also brilliant, genuinely brilliant, and that was the part that fooled her. Lynette had always been able to see past charm. It was the intelligence she trusted. Their courtship was fast. Their marriage was faster. His mother, Cecily Hartwell, had attended the wedding in a cream Chanel suit and said nothing unkind. She had not needed to. The way she looked at Lynette across the reception hall said everything that needed saying. She looked at her the way you look at something that has attached itself to something valuable. Lynette had told herself she was imagining it. She was not. The marriage lasted 6 years. The first 2 were good, genuinely good, the kind of good that makes you reckless because you stop preparing for things to go wrong. Preston worked. Lynette worked. She was a quantitative analyst at a hedge fund, one of 4 women on a floor of 40, and she was the best one there. Though it took her 3 years to understand that the performance reviews would never say so directly, she and Preston talked about the future the way young couples do, with a confidence that felt bottomless. He was building Hartwell Capital, his father's firm, into something larger. She was designing her exit from the hedge fund, quietly, carefully, the way her grandmother had taught her. What she was also doing, beginning in year 3 of their marriage, was investing. Not in Hartwell Capital, not yet. In a private fund she structured with 2 college friends, a real estate attorney named Doria McIntosh and a software engineer who went by the name Cal. They called it Obsidian Tier Partners. They told no one. Lynette had learned early that money announced quietly compounded faster than money announced loudly. By year 5 of her marriage, Obsidian Tier had returned 400%. By year 6, the night Preston sat across from her at the kitchen table and told her he wanted a divorce. She had already begun acquiring shares in Hartwell Capital through a shell company he had never bothered to investigate, because it had never occurred to him to look. He had looked at her in the kitchen that night, the way the security guard would look at her 4 years later. Like she was someone who needed to be managed out of a space she didn't belong in. "I think we've grown apart," he said. He was wearing the cashmere sweater she had bought him for his birthday. "I need someone who matches where I'm going." She had asked him what that meant. He hadn't answered directly. He didn't need to. 6 weeks later, she met Camille Fournier, 29 years old, an interior designer whose Instagram page featured 3 posts of her in Preston's apartment. Before Lynette's things were fully out of it. The divorce proceedings were where it got ugly. Preston's attorney was a man named Ashby, silver-haired, reptilian, with a habit of addressing Lynette directly in depositions while looking just slightly past her left shoulder, as if she were a bad smell he was choosing not to acknowledge. "Mists Ossie," Ashby said, deliberately dropping the Hartwell she had legally kept during the proceedings. Let's talk about your financial contributions to the marital estate. Let's, she said. Ashby had smiled, the smile of a man who had already won. You were employed as an analyst during the marriage, correct? Earning approximately. He checked his notes, though she suspected he had memorized the number, $142,000 annually at the time of separation. At the time of separation, yes. And you're claiming a portion of Hartwell Capital on the basis of that contribution. Among other things, O.C. The pause he inserted before her name each time was a small precise cruelty, no larger than a thumb pressed against a bruise. Hartwell Capital was founded by Edmund Hartwell Sr., incorporated before your marriage and expanded under Preston Hartwell's leadership. Your contribution to that entity was? Another pause. Domestic. From the gallery, Camille Fournier laughed. She had come to the deposition. Preston had let her come. Lynette looked at Ashby, then at Preston, who was examining the middle distance with the expression of a man who had misplaced something minor. Then at Camille, who was wearing earrings Lynette recognized. Preston had bought them. She had been with him when he did, in a jeweler on Madison Avenue. And she had pointed them out, because she thought they were beautiful, and he had said they weren't really her style. She looked back at Ashby. Domestic, she repeated. All right, Ashby smiled again, wider this time. We're prepared to offer a settlement. Given the prenuptial agreement limiting spousal support to assets accumulated jointly during the marriage, and given that our client holds the majority position in the firm. What percentage? Lynette asked. Ashby blinked. I'm sorry? What percentage of Hartwell Capital does your client currently hold? That's not relevant to. It's directly relevant, she said, to the conversation we're about to have. There was a pause. Ashby glanced at Preston, who gave a barely perceptible shrug. Our client holds 61% of voting shares, Ashby said. Did? Lynette said. The room went still, not quiet, still the way air goes before a pressure change. I'm sorry? Ashby said again. He kept saying that. She was beginning to think it was a reflex. Lynette reached into her tote bag and placed a single document on the table. It was printed, not bound, just a clean sheet with a header. She watched Ashby's eyes find and then read twice. Obsidian Tier Partners completed a secondary acquisition of Hartwell Capital shares 3 weeks ago, she said. The transfer was filed with the SEC on the 14th. As of that date, your client holds 38% of voting shares. Obsidian Tier Partners holds 43%. She heard Preston's chair scrape back. That's not, he started. And as the managing partner of Obsidian Tier, Lynette said, I hold controlling interest in the fund. The room did not erupt. It didn't need to. The silence that replaced the certainty Ashby had walked in with was louder than anything he could have said. Preston was standing now. His face had gone the color of old wax. You can't, how did you? Obsidian Tier is a. We vetted every potential acquirer, we ran background on every. You ran background on the fund, Lynette said. She was perfectly calm. She had been calm for years, the kind of calm that builds when you have been preparing for a specific moment and the moment finally arrives. You didn't run background on who manages it. You assumed a fund managed out of a Delaware LLC with a woman's name on the filing was small money. She picked up her tote bag. It wasn't. The shareholder meeting had been called for 9 a.m. It was 8:52 when Lynette walked past the security desk and took the elevator to the 43rd floor. Preston's executive assistant, a young man named Todd, who had always been polite to her in the way assistants are polite to the spouses of important people. Visible courtesy, invisible indifference, looked up when she stepped off the elevator and did not know what to do with his face. Miss O.C., he said, and then corrected himself. Mrs. Hartwell, I'm sorry, I wasn't. It's O.C., she said. I'll be in the boardroom. The boardroom of Hartwell Capital occupied the northeast corner of the 43rd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows on two sides looking out over Midtown, the kind of view that was supposed to make you feel powerful by proximity. Edmund Hartwell Sr.'s portrait hung on the south wall, oil on canvas, a big man with small eyes and the look of someone who had never been surprised. 37 people turned when Lynette entered. She recognized most of them, institutional investors, 2 members of the legacy board who had known her as Preston's wife, and had spoken to her about everything except business. 3 senior partners who had attended her wedding and given her crystal that she had packed into boxes and donated after the separation. She saw Preston at the head of the table, Camille in a chair along the wall where she had no business being, and Cecily Hartwell to Preston's left, in a dove-gray pantsuit that cost more than Lynette's monthly expenses in year 1 of the marriage. She saw Ashby standing by the window with 2 associates, all 3 of them holding coffee cups and exuding the specific confidence of men who have never been outmaneuvered. She walked to the chair at the opposite head of the table. Preston stood up. You can't sit there. That's not. The seating assignments for a shareholder meeting are determined by voting position, Lynette said, per the Hartwell Capital Charter, Section 4.2, which your father wrote. She glanced briefly at the portrait. The largest voting block holds primary position. She sat down. Cecily Hartwell's eyes had not moved from Lynette's face since she walked in. The older woman's expression was not rage, not confusion. It was something harder to name, the look of someone recalculating everything they thought they knew about a situation. This is a stunt, Ashby said, straightening. Whatever filing you've presented, we will contest it. The acquisition is procedurally. The acquisition was reviewed by the SEC, 2 independent counsel firms, and the fund's auditing partner at Deloitte. Lynette said without looking at him. She was looking at the board members. Anyone who wants to see the documentation can request it. It's been filed publicly since the 14th. You had 3 weeks. A long silence. You were acquiring our shares, Preston said. His voice was different now, flattened, stripped of the easy warmth she had once found irresistible. While we were in divorce proceedings. You were investing, Lynette said. The way I have been since year 3 of our marriage. The way you assumed I wasn't capable of doing without supervision. Camille had stopped smiling. She was looking at Preston with the focused attention of someone reassessing a situation rapidly. The proposed agenda for today's meeting, Lynette continued, turning to the room, includes a vote on the expansion of the Singapore office and an executive compensation package increase for the CEO. She opened the folder on the table in front of her. I have some amendments to that agenda. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. When it was over, Preston Hartwell retained his title as CEO, but the compensation increase did not pass. The Singapore expansion was tabled pending an independent operational review. 3 board seats were restructured, and the new chair of the Oversight Committee was elected by a vote of 24 to 13. The new chair was Lynette. She did not smile when the vote was announced. She wrote it down in the small notebook she carried everywhere. The same one she had been using since the first year of the marriage. The one Preston had once picked up from the kitchen counter and flipped through with a mildly curious expression before setting it back down without asking what was in it. He should have asked. She gathered her folder, capped her pen, and stood up. Cecily Hartwell was waiting for her in the hallway. The older woman had the posture of someone accustomed to arriving first in every room, and the expression of someone who had just been forced to revise a lifelong assumption. You planned this from the beginning, Cecily said. It was not a question. I planned a future, Lynette said. The divorce accelerated the timeline. Cecily was quiet for a moment. She was not a woman who was quiet often. My son is an idiot, she said finally. Yes, Lynette agreed. He gets it from his father's side. Cecily looked at the boardroom door, then back at Lynette. There was something in her eyes that might, in a different woman, have been respect. What do you intend to do with those shares? Build something, Lynette said. The way your father-in-law did. The way you should have let me try when I was sitting across from you at Sunday dinners, and you were deciding I wasn't worth listening to. Cecily's jaw tightened. Lynette picked up her tote bag. You're welcome to watch, she said, and walked to the elevator. The operational review Lynette ordered took 6 weeks. What it found was not a surprise to her. She had been reading Hartwell Capital's financials since year 2 of the marriage, the way some wives read their husbands' texts, quietly, thoroughly. Without announcing what they were doing, the Singapore expansion Preston had championed was built on a projection model that had not been updated since 2019. The base assumptions about regional market penetration were optimistic, by a margin that Lynette's team calculated at 34%. There was also a consulting fee arrangement, $2.3 million paid over 18 months, to a firm called Meridian Advisory Group, that, when Lynette's people looked closely, turned out to be a company registered to Camille Fournier's brother in Connecticut. She had Doria, her attorney, file the referral to the SEC's whistleblower division on a Tuesday morning. She did not call Preston first. She did not call Ashby. She sent the filing and then went to a spin class because she had promised herself she would start going again. The story broke on a Thursday. By Friday, it was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal's business section. Hartwell Capital CEO faces inquiry over culting payments. Preston called her 7 times. She let it go to voicemail until the 4th call, listened to 30 sets of it, and deleted the rest. On the following Monday, he resigned. She was in her own office on the 28th floor of a building in the Flatiron district. The office of Obsidian Tier Partners, which was not a small suite with the faintly provisional look of a company that wasn't sure how long it would be there. It was a proper floor, with real light and real people doing real work, 22 employees and a kitchen that stocked good coffee without anyone having to ask twice. Cal knocked on her door and leaned in. He was holding Hills up, a news alert on the screen. "He's out," Cal said. "I know," Lynette said. She was looking at a projection model she was building for a fund restructuring. She did not look up immediately. "You could at least pretend to feel something," he said. Grinning, she set down her pen. She thought about the kitchen table, the cashmere sweater, the way Preston had said, "I need someone who matches where I'm going," with the casual certainty of a man who had never considered that she might be going further. "I feel something," she said. "I just feel it quietly." Cal laughed and pulled the door closed behind him. But it wasn't over. The SEC inquiry was manageable, at least for the company. The consulting payments had been structured carefully enough that Preston's personal liability was, for now, contested. His attorneys, not Ashby, who had quietly distanced himself, but a new firm, hungrier, younger, more aggressive, filed a counter-motion. They were claiming that the share acquisition had been executed in bad faith, that Obsidian Tier had used information obtained during the marriage to identify and exploit vulnerabilities in Hartwell Capital's ownership structure. It was, legally speaking, a reach, but it was the kind of reach that, if it landed, could tie up the acquisition in litigation for 2 years. Lynette read the counter-motion on a Saturday morning at her kitchen table. Her kitchen table now, in the apartment she had taken after the divorce. A clean, quiet space on the Upper West Side that smelled like the eucalyptus candles she bought herself without asking anyone's opinion. She read it twice. Then she called Doria. "They're saying you had inside information," Doria said. She had already read it. She had probably read it before Lynette had. "They're going to depose you. They're going to ask about every conversation you had about Hartwell's financials during the marriage." "Let them," Lynette said. "Lynette, every share I purchased was acquired through publicly available secondary market data and filings that anyone could have accessed. I never used Preston's proprietary information. I didn't need to. The company's public disclosures were enough to identify the undervaluation." She paused. "I'm actually going to prove that in court. I'm going to put the entire acquisition methodology on record, with timestamps sourced entirely from public data." A silence. "You want to prove you did this without his inside information?" Doria said slowly. "Because that also proves that he was so transparent in his public filings that a single analyst working from open source data could outmaneuver him." "Yes," Lynette said. Another pause. "That's mean," Doria said, with something in her voice that sounded like admiration. "It's accurate," Lynette said. "The deposition happened on a Wednesday in a glass-walled room on the 37th floor of a building in Midtown, which was, Lynette noted, 4 floors below Hartwell Capital's boardroom." She filed that detail away without comment. Preston's new attorney was named Whitaker, younger than Ashby, with the alert, coiled energy of someone trying to prove something. Camille Fournier was not present. Lynette had heard through Doria that Camille had ended the relationship 2 weeks after the resignation. The apartment on Central Park West, it turned out, had been purchased through a corporate account that the SEC was now examining. Camille had hired her own attorney. Whitaker started with the basics, working up to his point the way a man who knows he has one good punch waits to throw it. "Miss O.C., during your marriage to Mr. Hartwell, did he discuss Hartwell Capital's financial position with you? Occasionally. Did he share projections, ownership structure, acquisition targets? He talked about his work the way people do when they live together. I listened the way I listen to everything." "And you're saying you did not use any of that information in your acquisition strategy?" "I used the information that was available to any investor in the market," Lynette said, which in this case was sufficient. She kept her face neutral. "You can review the methodology, it's been filed." Whitaker shifted. He had reached his punch. "Mrs. O.C., isn't it true that you began acquiring shares in Hartwell Capital before you retained any legal counsel in the divorce proceedings? That you made financial moves against your husband's interests before you had even disclosed your intentions?" The room was quiet. Lynette looked at him with the patience of someone who has been waiting for this specific question. "I made investments," she said. "Acquiring undervalued shares in a company is not a move against anyone's interests unless you assume the company belongs to one person. The shares I purchased were available on the open market, because other investors had chosen to sell them." She tilted her head slightly. "The only reason my investment is being characterized as a move against my husband's interests is the assumption that his interests and the company's interests are the same thing. As of last month's board vote, the board has determined that they are not." Whitaker looked at his notes. She watched him realize that the deposition had produced nothing usable. 3 weeks later, the counter-motion was withdrawn. 18 months after the shareholder meeting, Obsidian Tier Partners restructured Hartwell Capital. The name changed, The board changed. The Singapore expansion was replaced with a Southeast Asia fund that Lynette had designed with a team of analysts who were collectively a decade younger than the advisors. Preston had inherited and never questioned. The new entity was called Meridian Tier Capital, which Doria had objected to on the grounds that it would confuse people given the consulting firm's scandal, and Lynette had kept anyway because she liked the precision of it. Taking the name of the thing that had been used against her and making it hers. She was 32 years old. She was on the cover of Forbes that fall, which she found out about because Cal sent her the digital proof at 6 in the morning with a string of emojis she pretended to find excessive. The photograph was taken on the floor of the new office, her standing in the middle of it, not posed, just standing. In the gray blazer she had worn to 3 board meetings because she liked the way it fit. She was not smiling in the photo, which the editor had flagged and the photographer had convinced them to keep. The headline read, "She bought her ex-husband's company." Then she fixed it. She read it once and then set her phone down and finished her coffee. What the headline didn't say, what no headline would ever have enough room to say, was the part that mattered most to her. Not the acquisition, not the board vote, not the resignation, the SEC filing, or the counter motion that went nowhere. It was a Sunday 6 months into the marriage, when she had sat at Preston's kitchen table. His kitchen table, she had thought of it that way then, with the small notebook he never asked about, and written at the top of a clean page, "Build something of your own." She had done it in the margins of everything else, in the spaces he had not thought to look because he had not thought there was anything there. She had been building the whole time. Preston Hartwell relocated to Austin, where a college friend had offered him a role as a strategic advisor for a mid-sized fintech startup. The title was real. The equity stake was small. He was doing the work he had always theoretically respected but personally avoided. Granular, unglamorous, slow. Lynette found this out because Doria told her, the way Doria occasionally passed along information she had gathered from mutual professional connections. Not gossip, just data. "He said he's learning," Doria reported with the neutral tone of a woman who had practiced delivering this information without editorializing. "Good," Lynette said. "He also said," Doria paused, "you don't have to tell me. He said he was wrong about you. That he'd always known you were brilliant but he'd made himself ignore it because." Doria stopped. "I'm summarizing. You don't have to tell me," Lynette said again. She did not feel triumphant hearing it. She did not feel the particular heat of vindication that she had half expected to feel. Having spent so much of the past 3 years building toward this exact horizon, what she felt was closer to what her grandmother had described once, in a conversation Lynette had recorded in the notebook she still carried. The feeling of finishing a long, difficult book and sitting for a moment in the silence after the last page before you put it on the shelf. The account was settled. The story was closed. She had a board call at 2 and a new fund structure to review before then. She picked up her pen. Cecily Hartwell called on a Thursday in November. Lynette almost didn't answer. She looked at the name on the screen and thought about all the Sunday dinners, all the conversations that had stopped when she entered a room, all the years of being assessed and found insufficient. She answered, "I owe you an apology," Cecily said without preamble. She had always been direct. It was one of the few things about her Lynette had ever genuinely admired. "You don't owe me anything," Lynette said. "I do." A pause. "I looked at your fund's 5-year projections. Someone at Deloitte passed them to me. I hope that's all right. It's public information." "Yes." Another pause, longer. "You're going to be very large. Larger than us. Larger than we ever were. Even when my father-in-law built this thing in 1971 and thought he was building an empire." The older woman's voice was dry, but it was a different kind of dry than Lynette had heard from her before. Less dismissive. More honest. "I made a mistake with you. More than one." Lynette was quiet for a moment. She thought about saying something small and generous, offering the easy exit. She decided not to. "Yes," she said. "You did." A silence. "Fair enough," Cecily said. They talked for 11 more minutes about fund structure and regulatory changes in the private equity space. Because that was the conversation they should have been having since the beginning, and they were both, in their ways, practical women who preferred to be useful. When they hung up, Lynette sat for a moment at her desk in the Flatiron office, looking at nothing. Then she picked up the small notebook, the same one, filled 3 times over and continued in the same style across 4 identical replacements, and wrote one line. "Don't let anyone tell you silence is the same as nothing. Silence is where the work lives." She capped the pen, picked up her coffee, and pulled up the projection model she'd been building since 6 that morning. She had work to do. She always had work to do. That was the part they had never understood about her. Not Preston, Not Ashby, not Cecily, not the security guard with his clipboard. All the people who had seen a woman in a consignment shop dress and a cracked watch and decided, in the span of a glance, that she was somewhere between a burden and a footnote. She had never been a footnote. She had been writing the whole book.